I should probably open my Gemara if we're planning to get very far over here. Okay. My Gemara is open. Is it at the right place? What daf are we learning again? Oh gosh. Don't worry guys. Don't worry. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. I'll find my bearings. Friends, hi. Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 5 of Masechta Ayruvin. Let's do an overview. Once again, there are going to be some critical diagrams today. I will include them. Just in case anybody's unclear, the diagrams will always be linked in the description to a Google Drive folder that has them. I will try to create descriptive file names so that you'll know which one I'm referring to. Let's do an overview of the daf. We are going to begin by talking about what happens when you have a mavui where the Korah is greater than 20 tefachim off the ground. Let's leave it at that. What happens now if you have the opposite situation, which is that you have a Korah that is less than 10 tefachim from the ground? Now, there's a maximum height of 20 amos, but there's a minimum height also, and that is 10 tefachim. So how can you remedy that? We're then going to talk about what happens when there is like a protrusion from the wall of the mavui, sort of blocking the entrance to the mavui, not entirely, but somewhat. So what happens in that case? Let's get started. So we're going to start on Daf Daled Amud Beis, 2, 4, 6 lines from the bottom. Haya gavoa me'esrim ama uvad lema'ato. Okay, so you have a mavui. Great. I'm just going to assume that everybody knows what that is at that point, by this point. So you have a mavui. Now you also have a Korah. Going to assume you know what that is as well. Now, the Korah is more than 20 amos from the ground. So, of course, we know by now that, at least according to the Chachamim, and we're going to paskin like the Chachamim, so this is according to the Chachamim, it's a problem. So you gotta fix it. So, kama mimai. So how much do you have to lower this Korah? To which the Gemara asks, Kama mimai? Did you literally just ask me how much you have to lower this Korah? Kama ditzarich le. Lower it as much as you need to. Meaning, if the thing is 25 amos from the ground, so lower it 5 amos. If it's 30 amos, lower it 10 amos. What do you want me to tell you? So, ela rochbo bechama. No, what it means is this. It means is that if you're going to build a platform in order to minimize it, right? So one way to fix the situation would be to take the Korah and to lower it, right? So if it's 21 amos from the ground, so lower it 2 amos, right? Make it 19 amos from the ground. The other option would be to build a platform on the ground to raise up the ground, essentially. So now the space between the top of the platform and the bottom of the Korah is less than 20 amos. So that is what we're talking about here, okay? So if you want to, so you have this Korah that's more than 20 amos from the ground, and you want to build up a platform on the ground so that there will be less than 20 amos between the platform and the Korah. Now, in the first diagram that we have for today, you can see that platform resting on the ground and its relationship to the mavui that is directly above it. So now the question is, how wide does that platform need to be? When I say wide, I mean how far into the mavui does it have to go? Okay? And so obviously in terms of how tall does the platform have to be, it has to be tall enough so that the space from the platform to the Korah is going to be less than 20 amos. But the question is, how deep into the mavui does it have to go? So Rav Yosef Amar Tefach, Abaye Amar Arba. Rav Yosef says it needs to go into the mavui 1 tefach. Abaye says it has to go into the mavui 4 tefachim. Okay? So the Gemara wants to say, let's say that the following is the difference of opinion between Rav Yosef and Abaye. Diman Amar tefach kasaver muter l'shtamish tachas hakora, uman de Amar arba'a kasaver asr l'shtamis tachas akora. So the Gemara wants to say that this is the machlokas between Rav Yosef and Abaye. That Rav Yosef says you're allowed to use and carry in the area directly beneath the Korah. Okay? And therefore, so let's say you have the Korah. Now a Korah needs to be 1 tefach deep. It has to go 1 tefach into the mavoi. Okay? So, let's say that this platform that you're building at the entrance of the mavoi, so it only needs to be 1 tefach deep because you're allowed to use the area directly beneath the Korah. And therefore, all you need to do is build a platform that is 1 tefach deep, and you could hop onto this platform, and within that platform, you will be, when you're standing on the platform, you will be within 20 amos of the Korah. Problem solved. So even though inside of the mavoi, there will be more than 20 amos between the floor of the mavoi and where the Korah is. However, you're going to build this platform 1 tefach deep directly beneath the Korah, and since you're able to use the area directly beneath the Korah, so hop onto the platform. When you're on the platform, you'll be in an area that's less than 20 amos from the Korah above. Problem solved. Whereas Abaye says you're not allowed to use the area directly under the Korah. And since you can't use that area, so it's obviously going to have to go in a bit deeper so that there will be an area where you are allowed to stand and carry things within the mavoi that will be within 20 amos of the Korah, but not directly beneath it. So therefore Abaye says you have to build 4 tfachim deep so that you have a place to stand on this platform that is not directly beneath the Korah and still enough room to stand. So the Gemara answers lo. So the Gemara says no. Whereas Casey Neistat says you can't. Techule alma kasavre muter l'shtamesh tachas hakora. Because everyone agrees you're allowed to use the area directly beneath the beam. Okay, so if that's the case, then what's inspiring Abaye to say that the platform needs to go 4 tfachim into the mavoi? Why not just 1 tefach? And then you can use the area directly beneath the Korah. The following is the machlokas between Abaye and Rav Yosef. Mar savar Korah mishum heker, Mar savar Korah mishum mechitza. The machlokas between Rav Yosef and Abaye is that Rav Yosef says, what's the point of a Korah? The point of the Korah is, like Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, as a heker, to realize that you're in a mavoi and that the reason why you're allowed to carry right now is because you're in a mavoi. But if you step onto the other side of the mavoi into Rosh Hashanah, you will not be able to carry anymore. It's a heker. And therefore, as long as it's within 20 amos, you will notice it, and it will be a sufficient heker. And therefore, if you build this platform up to within 20 amos of the Korah, even if it's just 1 tefach, it doesn't matter. You'll hop onto the platform. When you're on this 1 tefach platform, you will be within 20 amos of the Korah. You'll notice it, and you won't then carry Neshus Harabim. Whereas Abaye says that the point of a mavoi, the point of a Korah is not just a heker. The point of the Korah is the following. Now listen closely, friends. We view it as though there is an imaginary wall that comes down from the outer side of the Korah. Okay? The outer side being the side that is flush against Rishus Harabim. The inner side would be the side that is within the mavoi. Okay? So listen to this, friends. Abaye says that we view it as if there is an imaginary wall that drops straight down from the outer side of the Korah, the side that's flush against the Rishus Harabim. Now, this wall can only go down 20 amos. It can't go down more than 20 amos. So therefore, we need to build up this wall. We need to build up a platform so that it's within 20 amos, so that this wall that comes down from the Korah will reach this platform. Now, friends, here's the thing. As Rashi points out, the kaimalan b'chol duchta, I'm in the Rashi mishum mechitza, about halfway into the Rashi. The kaimalan that we hold b'chol duchta in every place, the mechitza she'ena ru'uya l'daled lav mechitza hi. Any wall that isn't for 4 tfachim is not a wall, right? Just like kind of reminded me of the metaphor that ein melech below am. You can't have a king without a nation, right? If you just have a king, but no people that he rules over, well then great, mazel tov, you're a king. But part of being a king is to have a people and to make rules and to govern them. Without any people to govern and to rule over, you're not really much of a king, other than a self-proclaimed king. Here also, a wall that just goes down, but doesn't have any area that it's enclosing, isn't really much of a wall. So in order to have a proper wall, not only do you need a wall, but you also need an area for that wall. And that minimum area that we always refer to, such as by Rishus HaYachid, right? If you have 4 walls surrounding 3 tfachim by 3 tfachim, it's not a Rishus HaYachid. It's nothing, right? You need, in order for a space to be significant, it needs 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So here also, Abaye says, look, the thing by a Korah is that we view it as though there's a wall, an imaginary wall, that goes down from the outside of the Korah down to the floor of the Mavui. Now, it can't go further than 20 amos. So we have to build up a platform so that the top of the platform is within 20 amos of the Korah. Now, we can have our imaginary wall, but an imaginary wall is only as amazing as the place that it encloses. And therefore, you need to have at least a 4 tefach depth for this platform so that the wall can be enclosing this platform of 4 tefach depth. That is why Abaye says that you need the platform to go into the mavui 4 tefachim. So let's read it inside, friends. So Mar Savar Korah Mishum Heker. So Rav Yosef holds that the point of a Korah is that it serves as a Heker, as a recognition, as a remembrance that you're only able to carry because you're in a Mavui, but in Rishus HaRabim you cannot. And therefore, even if the platform is only 1 tefach deep, you'll hop on the platform, you'll see the Mavui above you, and you won't carry in Rishus HaRabim. Mar Savar Korah Mishum Mechitza. Whereas Abaye says that the goal of a Korah is not just to serve as a Heker, it actually creates an imaginary wall. Now, in order for this imaginary wall to be significant, it needs, in addition to needing to be no more than 20 amos, it also needs to enclose a space of 4 tefachim. And that is why he comes up with his number of 4 tefachim. Or I will give you a different reason. Even Abaye admits and agrees that the point of a Korah is as a heker, that you should notice it. Okay, well, if that's the point, so why not just do like Rav Yosef says, have a 1 tefach platform, hop onto the 1 tefach platform, you'll be within 20 amos of the Korah, and certainly you'll notice it. So v'hacha beheker shalmata keheker shalmayla kamiflige, and it's just a very simple machlokas, which is, does the lower heker need to be the same, can it be the same as the upper heker? Meaning, can this platform have the same dimensions as the Korah? Right? Can this lower platform have the same dimensions as the upper Korah? Right? So the Korah, all it needs is to go into the Mavui, a tefach. So according to Rav Yosef, yeah, they're the same. Just like the Korah just needs to go into the Mavui, a tefach, the platform also just needs to go into the Mavui, a tefach. Whereas Abaye says, no, they're different. That even though the Korah only needs to go into the Mavui, a tefach, the platform would go into the Mavui 4 tefachim. Right? And as Rashi points out, 4 tefachim is kind of like the next level up when it comes to sizes of rishuyos, right? So if it's not going to be a tefach, you're not going to move up to 2 or 3. You're going to move 4 is like the next one, like a Rishus HaYachid, right? So ve'eker shamayla kamiflige demar savar aminan heker shamata keheker shamayla. The Rav Yosef says, look, the lower heker is like the upper heker, i.e., this platform only needs to go into the mavui and tefach, just like the Korah only needs to go into the Mavui Atefach Umar Savar Lo Amrin and Heker Shamata Keker Shamaila. Whereas Abaye says we don't say that the lower Heker is like the upper Heker, meaning even though the Korah is only going into the Mavui Atefach, the platform would be going into the Mavui 4 Tefachim. That's Abaye. V'Ibai Sema, or I'll give you a third possibility and final possibility. Tichuliyama Amrinan Heker Shamata Keker Shamala. Abaye also agrees that we can compare the lower Heker to the upper Heker, the lower platform to the upper Korah. Here it's just machlokas of, do we have to be concerned that this Heker is going to, people are going to walk on it and it might become smaller, right? Meaning, let's say this platform is really just a mound of dirt, right? You're just taking some dirt and piling it up beneath the Korah. So Abaye is concerned that even though me'ikar hadin, all you need is for this raised up area to be 1 tefach deep, because we say heker shamata keker shamayla, that the definition of this platform can be based on the definition of the Korah, and just like the Korah goes into the mavui 1 tefach, this platform really only needs to go into the mavui a tefach. However, Abaye is concerned that people are going to be walking here, because after all, it is mamish the entrance to the mavui, and therefore this platform, the more people walk on it, the smaller and thinner it is going to get, and before you know it, it will no longer be a tefach, and it won't work anymore. People aren't going to notice, and you won't have a kosher, Korah anymore, and you won't be able to carry there, and people won't realize, and they'll carry anyways, and it's a problem. So Abaye says, look, build it out to 4, build it into the mavui 4 tefachim, so that even as it gets smaller, the more people walk over there, it'll still have a tefach. Whereas Rav Yosef says, look, let's worry about it when it happens. In the meantime, me'ikar din, all you need is a tefach into the mavui by this raised up area. So that is all you need according to Rav Yosef. Okay, so now the Gemara wants to know what happens in the opposite case. Let me actually just pull up the diagram over here so that it's available. Okay, so if you're looking at the diagrams, so this is the diagram, I guess the second diagram, and it's on the top left. I don't know if you can see I'm not sure that you can see on the page that it's 5A, but it's 5A2, but it's, there are 2 diagrams on this page, one on the top left, one kind of straight in the middle, on the bottom. So we're talking about the one on the top left, okay? That is describing the following case, which is basically the opposite of this case, which is what happens when the Korah is less than 10 tefachim from the floor of the mavui, i.e., where's the Korah? The Korah is on top of the walls. So the walls of the mavui are less than 10 tefachim, and then you have a Korah on top of that. Now there's a minimum height for a Korah. That minimum height is 10 tefachim. Now this is less than 10 tefachim from the ground. So in this case, what you want to do is you want to dig out from the ground of the mavui so that the Korah will be 10 tefachim from the ground. So now the question is basically the same as before. How far into the mavui do you have to dig? Now there is going to be a fundamental difference between digging out the floor of the mavui in order to essentially create a mavui versus the previous example, which was when you already have a mavui, you just need to get this Korah to be within 20 amos of the ground, right? So, meaning in this case, you don't even have a mavui. Meaning in order for this area that these chatzeros open into to be called a mavui, it has to have a minimum, it has to have walls that are 10 tefachim tall. Those are like the basic, dimensions of a wall. So as long as the walls of the mavui are less than 10 tefachim tall and the Korah is less than 10 tefachim from the ground, you don't even have a mavui. So by digging out this area beneath the Korah and making the walls now 10 tefachim, you're actually creating a mavui that didn't exist before. So the question that we're essentially asking now is, what is the depth that we need in order to define a mavui? Now this is different than the previous case, which is you already had a mavui. You had a very, very geshmaka mavui. It was such a good mavui that it was even taller than 20 amos. And so in that case, you already have a mavui. You have a kosher mavui. The question is that this Korah that's on top of the walls is too high from the ground. So if we want to raise up an area under the Korah, how much do we have to raise up? That's a different question than basically how do you create a mavui and how deep does the floor of the mavui need to be? That is the question that we are essentially concerning ourselves with now. So the Gemara says, so if the walls of the mavui and subsequently the Korah that was resting on those walls was less than 10 tefachim tall, so the Korah was less than 10 tefachim off the ground, and then you took out your shovels and you started digging in the ground so that the floor of the mavui will be at least 10 tfachim from the Korah. And subsequently, the walls of the mavui will also be 10 tfachim tall. So, kama chokek. So, how deep does he have to dig? Kama chokek. What do you mean, how deep does he have to dig? Kama v'tzarich. You have to, meaning how deep into the ground. Forget about into the mavui. How deep into the ground do you have to dig? So the Gemara says, what kind of question is that? You have to dig deep enough so that the Korah will now be 10 tvachim from the ground. So the Gemara says, Ella mishcho b'chama. No, what it means is how deep into the mavui do you have to dig it? Meaning, obviously, into the ground, you have to dig it deep enough so that there will be 10 tvachim from the Korah to the ground. The Gemara says, what I'm asking is, how deep into the mavui do I need to dig this digging? So Rav Yosef Amar ba'arba tfachim. So Rav Yosef says, you need to dig 4 tfachim into the mavui. Abaye Amar ba'arba amos. Whereas Abaye says, you have to dig 4 amos into the mavui. Now, this essentially, what Rav Yosef and Abaye are arguing about is, what is the minimum depth of a mavui? Rav Yosef says the minimum depth of a mavui is 4 tfachim, whereas Abaye says the minimum depth of a mavui is 4 amos. So let's say that Rav Yosef and Abaye are arguing and would have differing opinions regarding the case that we're about to learn from Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. De Itmar, that it was stated, Mavui shenifratz mitzido klape rosho. Okay. What happens if you have a mavui that got a breach in the wall towards the entrance of the mavui? Now, it's going to be much easier to visualize it in the diagram. This is on the same page as the previous diagram, but it's the diagram smack in the middle all the way at the bottom. And what you can see in that diagram is that you have a mavui. You have a regular mavui that you have Rosh Hashanah outside of it, and you can turn into the mavui. You see the Korah on top, all good. But what happens is, you can see there's a big geschmacka breach in one of the walls of the mavui. Okay? So you walk into the mavui, and then you see that there's a little bit of wall, but then there's a big breach in the wall, and then the wall continues. So that is the case that we're talking about. Okay? You have a mavui that you walk into the mavui, and then a little bit after you walk into the mavui, the wall is breached and there's a big hole there. Okay? That is what we're talking about. So, where are we? So, Itmar Mishmei Rabbi Ami Rabbi Asi. So it was taught in the name of Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi that Im Yesham Pas Arba, that if when you walk into the mavui, there is still 4 tfachim worth of wall before the breach begins, well then all good. All good. You have nothing to worry about. Matir bepirza ad eser. Then as long as this breach in the wall is less than 10 amos, as we learned on the very first day, that as long as it's less than 10 amos, well then it's considered a pesach, which is part of the wall, and therefore there is no problem. It's, meaning a wall is allowed to have psachim in it, is allowed to have openings in it, and as long as this breach is less than 10 amos wide, so it'll just be considered part of the wall, an opening in the wall, and that's fine. And you have a mavui that is surrounded by however many walls it needs, and sure, there's an opening in one of the walls, but that's just considered a pesach, and that's acceptable. At the beginning of this mavui, you have a korah to allow you to carry in it. There's no problem at all. As long as, when you walk into the mavui, there is still 4 tfachim of wall before the breach begins. Vim lav. Now, if there isn't 4 tfachim of wall, well, then already it's a problem. Right? Pachas mishlosha matir. So, if the breach is less than 3 tfachim wide, well then we could just say lavud, and it's considered as if the wall is completely closed and there's no problem. Because as far as we're concerned halachically, there is no breach in the wall because of lavud. However, shlosha, if the breach is 3 or more tfachim wide, well then we have a problem. Eino matir. The korah is not going to be the matir, the mavui, because when you walk into the mavui, there is less than 4 tfachim of wall before this breach exists, right? Meaning, and therefore you don't have a mavui that is mutar. Meaning. So what we want to argue right now, let's read a few more words. Rav Yosef Islay de Rabbi Ami Abaye leisle de Rabbi Ami. What we want to say is that Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi are basically in line with Rabbi Yosef's opinion, which is that the definition of a mavoi is that it needs to be at least 4 tfachim deep. And if it isn't 4 tfachim deep, you don't have a mavoi. And therefore, when you walk into this mavoi that has a breach in the wall, when you walk into this mavoi and there's 4 tfachim of wall before the breach begins, well, at least you have a mavoi that was made kosher to carry in by way of the Korah, right? You walked into the mavoi, there's a Korah above, there's still 4 tfachim of wall, which means that you have this Korah that's permitting this mavoi that is 4 tfachim deep, and that's already a kosher mavoi, that's considered a mavoi, according to Rav Yosef, and we want to argue that that's what Rav Ami and Rabbi Asi are saying as well. And therefore, once you have this mavoi that was made kosher by the Korah, so even if there is a breach in the wall, well, as long as it's less than 10 amos, then it's just considered a Pesach, and it's fine. You have this mavoi that has a Pesach in it, but at the beginning, when the main entrance has this Korah over it, which is matir the mavoi to carry in it, it's really no problem. However, if that space is less than 4 tfachim, so then this Korah is not being matir anything. There's 3 tfachim, which isn't a proper mavoi, so it's not being matir the first 3 tfachim, because, in order to be matir, it actually needs to be a mavoi, but 3 tfachim isn't yet a mavoi. And then there's this breach. So, then there's like a breach until the wall continues, but, this Korah was never actually matir anything, right? If there was 4 tfachim before the breach began, well then the Korah is being matir that initial 4 tfachim, which is considered a kosher mavoi. And once it's matir that, it could just, we say it's matir the whole mavoi, even though there's a breach in the wall. However, if there were not 4 tfachim, well then it wasn't yet matir anything to begin with. And therefore, you don't have any mavoi that was ever made mutter by this Korah, and essentially you have nothing. So, we want to say that from the fact that Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi are giving significance to 4 tfachim, that seems to be like Rav Yosef, who says that the hechsher of a mavoi is 4 tfachim of depth. Whereas Abaye, we would want to argue that according to Abaye, you would have to have 4 amos of wall before the breach can begin in order for us to consider this Korah to have made a mavui mutter to carry in it. So Abaye is going to respond, Amar lach Abaye. Abaye will respond that Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi could agree with Abaye that in order to make a kosher mavui, you need 4 amos of depth. And Abaye is just going to say, look, this was a kosher mavui. We're not building a mavui. Now we're talking about a mavui in Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi's case. We're talking about a mavui that already existed. We're talking about a mavui that was once upon a time, it was a kosher mavui. You would walk into it and it was really long. And there were no breaches in the wall. And then at some later point, the wall got breached. And the question is, do we have to disqualify this mavui? Do we have to say that it's no longer a mavui because it got a breach in the wall? Or can we say that, what does it need to still have in order for us to still consider it to be a mavui? And in this case, when we're sort of, reverse engineering it, we're sort of going from the back, starting from the end to the front, because, right, where it started out as a kosher mavui, and we're saying how much still needs to remain in order for us to say that it can retain its kosher status. Well, in that case, as long as there's 4 tfachim of wall, we could say that it still holds on to being a mavui. But if you're going to ask me, if I don't have a mavui bichlal, and I want to build a mavui from scratch, how deep does the mavui have to go? The answer is 4 amos. So, Amar lach Abaye, hasam sof mavui, hacha tchilas mavui. Right? In that case, with the breach of Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, we're talking about that you already had a mavui, and then a breach got into it, and we're saying, can it still maintain the status of a mavui? And we say, as long as there is a depth of a wall of 4 tfachim, yes, it can retain its status of a mavui. However, in this case, where you don't have a mavui, we're talking about walls that are less than 10 tfachim tall, and you have a korah on top of that, and you're digging out the floor in order to create a mavui, it's going to have a depth of 4 amos. I'ika arba amos in ilolo. If there are 4 amos, then mazel tov, you have a mavui. If there aren't 4 amos, then mazel tov, you don't have a mavui. Amar Abaye mino aminala. So now Abaye says, and how do I know that I'm right? How do I know that a mavui has to have a depth of 4 amos? The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, a mavui nitar belechi v'korah ad shiyu batim v'achzeres psuchin nesocho. So we have a Brisa that says that in order for a mavui to essentially be the mavui that we're talking about, right? That, you have different chatzeres, they open up into this mavui, can people carry in there? So in order for a mavui to be considered a mavui, that you would add a korah or a lechi, everything that we're talking about, what kind of mavui are we talking about? It must have at least 2 chatzeres that open up into this alleyway, 2 courtyards opening up into this alleyway, and within each courtyard, there has to be at least 2 houses opening up into the courtyard. That's what we're talking about. After all, that's what the assumption we're making. You have these courtyards, there are multiple houses in the courtyards, and you have these courtyards, they open up into a mavui. That's necessary. If you only have 1 courtyard opening up into the mavui, it's not going to be the mavui that we're talking about with the lechi and a korah. Or if you don't have more than 2 houses, 2 or more houses opening up into the chatzer. Like, in order to have this mavui that we're talking about with the korah and the lechi and the carrying, you need the alleyway, and opening up into the alleyway, you need at least 2 chatzers. And in each of those chatzers, you have to have at least 2 houses opening up into them. Now, says Abaye, very good kasha l'maisa Abaye. The ibedalid heichi mishkachas la. And Abaye asks against Rav Yosef, if we're talking about 4 tfachim, that would be impossible. Okay, imagine our mavui. Imagine our mavui. You can see it on the next page of diagrams. You can see it. So this is the page with kind of 5 diagrams on it. On the left side, there are 2 diagrams, then kind of sticking out in between both columns, there's 2 at the bottom, and then on the top right, there's another diagram. So we're talking about the top left diagram. Okay? Basically, what it's talking about is, so imagine you walk into a mavui, okay? And then on your right, there is a chatzer that opens up into this mavui, and on your left, there's a chatzer that opens up into this mavui. Now, here's the problem. The problem is, if the entire depth of this mavui is only 4 tfachim, so a pesach, an entranceway, i.e., the entranceway from the chatzer into the mavui, the definition of an entranceway, the space of the, in the wall, needs to be at least 4 tfachim. Friends, if you have a wall that's only a maximum of 4 tfachim, and you have to create an opening in that wall that is 4 tfachim wide in order to be considered an entrance, you don't have a wall at all. The entire wall is just the entrance, right? Meaning, if we're looking for a mavui to be a wall, and in that wall there is an entrance to a chatzer, well then the wall is going to have to be at least more than 4 tfachim in order to have an entranceway that is 4 tfachim wide through which you can walk to and from the chatzer and the mavui. So Abaye asked against Rav Yosef, how can you say that a mavui only has to have a depth of 4 tfachim if we also know that a mavui needs to have at least 2 chatzeres that open into it, and the entrance and the opening between the mavui and the chatzer has to itself be 4 tfachim. So obviously the depth of the mavui is going to have to be more than 4 tfachim in order to be kosher. So then the Gemara has a very good solution, which is, well, who says that the chatzeros need to be on the right and the left of the mavui? Maybe they can be in the back wall. So you walk into the mavui, you're in Rosh Hashanah, and then you walk into the mavui, and you have a wall on your right and a wall on your left, and these walls have a depth of 4 tfachim. Now after 4 tfachim, you're already at the back of the mavui. The back of the mavui is very wide. It's very wide. And in that back wall, you have 2 openings. And those openings are each, at least 4 tfachim wide. And they take you into the 2 chatzeres that are in the back of the mavui. And now you have 2 chatzeres that open up into the mavui. problem solved. Right? And each one of those chatzeros has 2 houses in it, problem solved. So the Gemara says the problem isn't solved. Where am I? Amar of Nachman, but Rav Nachman says, Nikitinan, that we have a tradition, which is interesting. He's not saying that we have a brisa, he's saying that we have a tradition, and Rashi defines it as Masores me'abosenu u'minig me'abosenu. It's a tradition we have from our fathers and a custom from our rabbis. This isn't a brisa or anything, but we have this tradition. Ezu mavui shenitar belechi v'korah. What is a mavui that we're talking about that you can use a lechi and a korah? Kol she'orko yaseh arachba. Its depth needs to be greater than its width. Uvatim v'chatzeres psuchim nesocha. And you have to have houses and chatzeres opening into this mavui. So, Abaye is asking a pretty strong question on Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef, how can you say that the depth of a mavui only needs to be 4 tfachim if we also know that you have to have 2 chatzeres that open up into this mavui, and those 2 and assuming that the chatzeres are opening up into the mavui from the side, well, if the entire depth of the mavui was only 4 tfachim, well, these chatzeres are going to have, entranceways. And those entranceways themselves, in order to be considered proper entranceways, need to have at least 4 tefachim, which means you don't have a wall anymore. And if you want to say no, that the entranceways are along the back wall, well, then that would mean that the back wall would have to be more than 4 tefachim wide, which means that you have a mavui that's wider than it is deep. And Rav Nachman says that we have a tradition that you can't have a mavui that is wider than it is deep. It has to be deeper than it is wide. So, Rav Yosef, how can you even say that the depth of a mavui is only 4 tefachim? So Rav Yosef gives an interesting answer. Is Rav Yosef the pasach lu b'karen zavis? So according to Rav Yosef, he says, well, the entrance to these 2 chatzeres are in the corners, which is very interesting. So this is going to be, if you look on the diagrams, on the bottom there are like 2 diagrams, one next to the other. Forget about the one on the right. Look at the one on the left. Basically, imagine you have this mavui. So I'm just looking at the diagram over here, and I'm going to be working with this diagram. So you walk into this mavui, right? So at the bottom of the diagram, you have your Rishus HaRabim. Then you walk into the mavui. Now the mavui is 4 tefachim wide, and it's 4 tefachim deep. There are other kashas related to that, but we're going to ignore them. So it's 4 tefachim wide, and it's 4 tefachim deep. Okay? Now, what you do is, you see that there's a chatzer on the right and there's a chatzer on the left. And those 2 chatzers open up into the mavui. Okay, so we have our 2 chatzers that open up into the mavui. Now, the opening is in the corners, in the back left and back right corners respectively. And you can see that 3 tefachim of the entranceway is from the left wall of the mavui. And 1 tefach of the entranceway is from the back wall. So basically between the 3 tefachim from the left wall and the right wall respectively, and the 1 tefach in each of their openings from the back wall, so you have an opening of 4 tefachim, and you also have a depth, while maintaining a depth of the mavui at 4 tefachim as well. And the first tefach of the mavui is basically a wall, it's essentially the outer wall of the mavui, but also goes in 1 tefach into the mavui. Then you have 3 tefachim of space that are part of the entranceway to the chatzer. Then 1 tefach in the back wall is also connected to each of the, on either side, 1 tefach on either side is connected to the 2 chatzers respectively. And that way you can have your 4 tefach deep mavui, and also have your 2 chatzers that open into it, and each entranceway of the chatzer is still 4 tefachim. Sweet. So Abaye tries again. Amar Abaye, Mino Aminallah. So Abaye tries again. He says, you know what? I'll bring you a different proof that the depth of a mavui is 4 amos. The Amar Rami Bar Chama Amar Rav Huna. It says Rami Bar Chama in the name of Rav Huna. Lechi abolet midofno shel mavui pachos me'arba amos nidon mishum lechi. Ve'eno tzarich lechi acher latiro. Let's read that again. So if you basically have a wall that is jutting out into the entranceway of the mavui, right? So imagine you're in Rosh Hashanah and you're turning into the mavui. So now that the width of the mavui, there's actually some of one of the outer walls of the mavui is actually jutting into the entranceway of the mavui. It's jutting into that width, okay? And you can see in the diagram on the same page at the top right, okay? So it's actually a little bit hard to see in the diagram, but you see where it says protruding lechi with an arrow? So that is actually going into the entrance of the mavui, right? It's like jutting out from the left wall of like probably the left chatzer. So it's blocking the entranceway to the mavui somewhat, okay? So we say that as long as it's jutting out into the entranceway of the mavui less than 4 amos, right? Again, so lechi aboli midofno shel mavui pachus me'arba amos. If this, you basically have part of the wall that's jutting into the entrance of the mavui, if it's less than 4 amos, nidon mishum lechi, so we can treat it as a lechi, and that's the lechi of the mavui, and it's going to serve as a reminder to the people in the mavui that you're only allowed to carry in the mavui because it's a Yershus HaYachid. But past the mavui, you can't carry because there's Yershus HaRabim. You don't need to construct another lechi. This part of the wall that's jutting into the entrance is enough to serve as a lechi. Daled amis, but if the wall juts into the entrance 4 amis, well then nidon mishum mavui, well then that wall that's jutting into the entrance is itself going to be considered part of the mavui. And therefore, therefore you're going to need an additional lechi, to construct an additional lechi, to serve as a reminder to the people in the mavui that they're not allowed to carry in Rosh Hashanah. So Abaye wants to argue, you see, only once this wall that's jutting out becomes 4 amos, at that point, what do we say? It's part of the mavui, and you need a different lechi. So we see that the walls of a mavui are defined by 4 amos depth. 4, in this case width, but the same thing would be for depth. For Rav Yosef responds, no. La'afuke mitoras lechi adika arba amos. L'mehavi mavui afilu ba'arba tfachim nami havi mavui. Rav Yosef says, look, these are two distinct things. We're talking about lechi and we're talking about mavui. In terms of a lechi, yeah, as long as it's less than 4 amos, it could still be considered a lechi. And as long as this wall that's jutting out into the entrance is less than 4 amos, we can consider it a lechi. However, when it comes to the depth of a mavui, which is something else, that only needs 4 tfachim. Okay, fine. Gufa, we said earlier, Amar Rami Bar Chama, Amar Rav Huna, lechi abole midofno shel mavui. If you have a lechi, i.e., some wall that is jutting in from the wall of the mavui into the mavui, into the entranceway to the mavui, pachus me'arba amos nidon mishum lechi. As long as it's jutting into the entrance less than 4 amos, it's blocking the entrance less than 4 amos, so then it can be treated as a lechi. Ve'ein tzarich lechi acher latir. You don't have to add another lechi to serve as this heker. Daled amos, but if it's jutting into the entranceway 4 amos, nidon mishum mavui, well then the wall is just going to be considered part of the mavui. Ve'tzarich lechi acher latiro. You're going to have to construct an additional lechi as a heker to allow you to carry in the mavui. The Gemara wants to know, oso lechi heichen ma'mido. Where do you put this lechi? Idemukila bahade. If you're just going to attach it as an extension of this wall that's already jutting into the entranceway 4 amos, osve hu dekamosif ale. Well, then you're just adding on to this wall that we already said is considered part of the mavui. The point is that we want to create something separate that's going to be a heker. If we say that this wall is considered just part of the mavui, well, adding on to it won't really be a very good heker. It's just going to be adding on to something that's already not considered a heker. Amar Papa, Demukile le'idach gisa. So Papa says, well, you're just adding it to the opposite side of the entrance. So if you look at that same diagram, the top left diagram, so you could see that on the right side of the entrance, that's where your lechi is. So while the wall is jutting in from the left side, you then construct a lechi on the right side, and that will be the heker. Rav Huna Brei Rav Yehoshua Amar said, Rav Papa's sidekick, Rav Huna Brei Rav Yehoshua, Afilu Tema Demukila Ba'ade. You can even add this lechi to the jutting out wall. Dematveba or demivtzarba. And you just have to make sure that it's clear that this is not the same thing, right? Meaning, if you have like a stone wall that's jutting into the chotzer, right, into the mavui, blocking the way, so this addition that you're going to add onto it as the lechi just needs to be either taller than it, or shorter than it, or wider than it, or thinner than it, something that is going to draw your eye and draw your attention to show that, hey, this was put here for some other reason. And that would be as a reminder that you should not be carrying in Rosh Hashanah. Amar Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua. Said Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua, Lo amaran ela b'mavui shmone, ava b'mavui sheva nita b'omen muba ala par. It's very interesting. So it says Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua that when we're having this discussion right now about if the wall juts into the entrance of the mavui 4 amos, then it won't be considered a lechi. You're going to have to add another lechi. That's only a question assuming that the width of the entrance of the mavui is 8 tfachim or more. 8 amos or more. So if the entrance of the mavui is 8 amos, or if the width of it is 8 amos or more, and you have this wall jutting into that 4 amos, so then we say that you will need another lechi in order to allow you to carry in the mavui. However, if the mavui is only, let's say, 7 amos wide, well then the 4 amos wall that's jutting into the entrance is basically blocking 4 of the 7 amos of the width of the mavui, which means you have more wall than you have open entranceway. And therefore, once you have more wall than you have opening, well, then it's just considered like there's a wall, and this opening is just considered a pesach, an opening in the wall, and it's just considered part of the wall. You don't need a lechi or a korah anymore. The whole idea of a lechi and a korah is when there is no wall at the entrance, right? The mavui that we're talking about is a mavui sasum, a mavui that is closed on 3 sides, but it's completely open to Rosh Hashanah. So we say, because we want to make sure that you're not going to carry in Rosh Hashanah, put up a lechi or a korah, some kind of heker, to remind you not to carry in Rosh Hashanah. However, if there's a wall there essentially, i.e., we have this wall jutting out into the entranceway, and if it would be more than a majority, more than half of the entranceway, well, then it would just be considered like it's not open to Rosh Hashanah anymore, it's actually closed on all sides. And this opening would just be considered a pesach in the opening. It wouldn't need a lechi or a korah anymore. So that's what Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua is saying. Amar Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua, Lo amaran ela b'mavui shmone. That when we say that when the wall juts in 4 amos into the entranceway, if it's 4 amos, then you would need a lechi or a korah. That is only talking about a mavui that is 8 or more amos wide. Aval b'mavui sheva nitar b'omen ruba ala paretz. But if the width of the mavui is only 7 amos wide, well then that means that the wall that is jutting out is 4 amos out of the 7 amos of the width, which means that there is more wall than there is breach, and therefore you will be able to carry in the mavui even without a lechi or a korah. V'kavachomer mechatzer. And Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua says, and you can assume this based on a kal v'chomer from a chatzer. Umachatzer she'ena niteres belechi v'korah, niteres ba'omen muba ala parutz, mavui shenitar belechi v'korah, and udin shenitar ba'omen muba ala parutz. So, let's read that again. If you have a chatzer, okay, so let's say you have a chatzer, and this chatzer does not open up into a mavui. Rather, this chatzer opens up directly into Rosh Hashanah. So you're in Rosh Hashanah, and there's a doorway over there, and you turn into that doorway, and voila, you're in a chatzer. And that chatzer has 2 homes that open into it. Great. But what happens if there isn't actually a doorway that opens into this chatzer? What if there is bichlal no wall there, right? What if you have a chatzer, it's surrounded, right? You have 2 houses that open up into this surrounding area. Now that area is surrounded by 3 walls, but on the 4th wall it is completely open to Rishus Harabim. So we say that you cannot use a lechi and a korah in order to enable carrying in there. Whereas by a mavui, you just put up a pole or a crossbeam and you can carry in there. That does not apply to a chatzer. You won't be able to just put up a lechi or a korah and carry in there, which means that a chatzer is actually more chamur. It's actually stricter, a more severe case than the mavui, because after all, a mavui is more lenient. Put up a lechi, put up a korah, and you can carry in there. So therefore, niteres be'omed murba laparutz, and yet, when it comes to a chatzer, as long as you have, right, there's halacha by a chatzer, that even, so now going back to a chatzer with 4 walls, so if you have a chatzer that's surrounded by 4 walls, but there are breaches throughout all the walls have holes in them, we say, as long as there is more wall than there is breach, well then, then you would be allowed to carry in there. Oh, there's another siren again. So if in this case of a chatzer, which is a more severe case because you can't just put up a lechi or a korah in order to carry in there, yet we say that as long as there is more wall than there is breach, the walls would be considered acceptable. So then certainly mavui shenitar belechi v'korah, certainly a mavui that as long as you put up a lechi or a korah, you're allowed to carry in there, therefore it's a less severe case. Well then eno din shenitar ba'omid mubal aparts, well then certainly as long as there's more wall than there is breach, you should be able to carry in there. But then the Gemara tries to disqualify this kal v'chomer by saying that actually what you're assuming is the more severe case, i.e. the chatzer, and the more lenient case, i.e. the mavui. That's not really the case, because I could argue that mavui is actually more severe than chatzer. Ma l'chatzer sheken pirtzasa be'eser, tomar b'mavui shepirtzaso b'arba. A chatzer is actually more lenient than a mavui in the sense that the walls of a chatzer, if there is a breach in the wall, well, as long as it's less than 10 tfachim or amos, so really 10 amos or less, well, then it's still considered a pesach and it doesn't mess up the wall. Whereas by a mavui, once there's a breach in the mavui wall that is 4 tfachim, well, then it's already considered a breach in the wall, and it's going to mess up the wall of the mavui. So therefore we see that mavui is actually more severe than chatzer. So kasav Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua mavui nami pirtzasu be'eser. So Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua holds that no, just like by a chatzer, a breach in the wall of a mavui would be defined by more than 10 amos, and therefore it doesn't make. Therefore, regarding the breach, mavui and chatzer are exactly the same. But in terms of a lechi and a korah, a chatzer is more severe in that a lechi and a korah won't work, as opposed to a mavui where a lechi and a korah does work. So therefore, if there, more wall than breach works by a chatzer, well then certainly it will be affected by a mavui, which is less severe. So the Gemara wants to say, liman ka'amrinon. Yeah, but what are we going on? We're going based on the case of Rami Bar Chama in the name of Rav Huna, regarding this wall that juts into the entrance of the mavui. The Rav Huna, right? V'ha Rav Huna pirtzaso b'daled svirle. But Rav Huna holds that the breach of a mavui is defined by 4 tfachim, not by 10 amos. So Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua time adenaf shekamar. Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua, he's doing his own thing. He's doing his own thing. He assumes that a breach in a mavui would be 10 amos. And he's also making the argument that we should be able to apply the concept of more wall than breach to a mavui to say that as long as there is more wall than there is breach, you would be able to carry in the mavui without a lechi or a korah, just like we say that as long as there's more wall than breach by a chatzer, that will be acceptable. Rav Ashi Amar, so Rav Ashi says something interesting, which is afilu tema b'mavui shmone nami lo tzarich lechi. So Rav Ashi says actually, if you have a mavui that is 8 amos wide, and then you have this wall jutting into it that is 4 amos, right, that juts into it 4 amos. So Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua said, in that case you would need to have a lechi and a korah, right, because it's not the majority of the space. So Rav Ashi says that actually when you have the mavui is 8 amos wide, and you have this wall jutting into the entrance 4 amos, Rav Ashi wants to argue that actually in that case, you also wouldn't need a lechi or a korah. How come? So manafshach, because he says either way you look at it, you won't have to put up a lechi or a korah. He omed nafish, because let's say that, it's hard to be exact. It's hard to know that this wall that juts into the mavui is exactly 4 amos wide, right? Maybe it's slightly larger than 4 amos. Well, if it's slightly larger than 4 amos wide, well then that means that there's more wall than there is breach. So nitar ba'omin ruba ala parit. So be able to carry in the mavui without a lechi or a korah because there's more wall than there is breach. The parut's nafish. Now, if it's slightly less than 4 amos, well, then that means that there is more breach than there is wall, but nidon mishum lechi. But we said that as long as the wall that juts into the entrance is less than 4 amos, it could just be a lechi. So then you have a lechi. You don't have to bring another. I don't know what I just said, but as long as the wall that juts into the entrance of the mavui is less than 4 amos, so we say that it's just considered a lechi. So there's your lechi. You don't need to build another lechi. So again, if it's slightly more than 4 amos, well then it's more than half of the mavui. So you have more wall than you have breach. And if it's slightly less than 4 amos wide, well then that itself would be the lechi. You don't need to bring another lechi. My omar teshavu, and let's say you want to say that, well, maybe, right, teshavu tabayu ki adade. You want to say, yeah, but maybe it's mamash exactly 4 amos out of 8 amos. We can't know that for sure. So therefore, havale safik devein v'safik devein lehakel. Right, since we can't be exactly sure if this wall is exactly half, or maybe slightly more, or maybe slightly less, so we're basically besuffic about do we need to put up a lechi or not, and the whole idea of a mavui is only midrabanan anyways, because midoraisa you can carry there because it's a rishus hayachid, and therefore you don't have to put up an extra lechi or korah because suffik devreim lehakel. More sirens. There's sirens all the time. I don't understand why there are so many sirens in this town. Okay, friends, so that was Daf Hey of Masechta Ayruvin. Alright, I just waited for the sirens to end. Here we go. Let us review this page. So at the beginning we talked about building a platform for a mavui that is more than 20 amos tall. So Rav Yosef said that the depth of this platform needs to be only 1 tefach. Abai says it has to be 4 tefachim deep. And then we gave 3 suggestions for what the machlokas between them might be. So the first one was that we said, well, Rav Yosef says that a mavui, that the korah is there to serve as a heker. And therefore, as long as you build up the platform high enough, even if it's only 1 tefach deep, you'll still hop onto that platform, and you'll see the mavui and you won't the korah, and you won't carry rishus harabim. Abai says no. The point of a korah is actually that it creates an invisible wall. That invisible wall needs to be within 20 amos. Can only be a maximum of 20 amos. And therefore, once you're building an invisible wall has to be enclosing an area of at least 4 tefachim. That's why the platform needs to be 4 tefachim deep. The other way to say it is that no, everyone agrees that it's only as a heker, but the machlokas is, do we say that the platform on the bottom has the same depth as the platform as the platform on top, i.e. the korah. So Rav Yosef says that it's the same, and therefore since the korah only needs to go 1 tefach deep into the mavui, so does the platform. Whereas Abai says no, they're different. Even though the korah only goes 1 tefach into the mavui, the platform will go 4 tefachim into the mavui. And then the final way to say is that no, they both agree that there's the same dimensions on top and the bottom. The only thing is, are we concerned that when people walk on this mound could be made out of dirt, and the more people walk there, the smaller it's going to get. And if it's exactly 1 tefach, well then people are going to walk there, and before you know it, it's going to be less than a tefach. So Abai says, in order to not have to be concerned about that, let's just build it 4 tefachim deep. Whereas Rav Yosef says, let's worry about it when it happens. You only need to build it 1 tefach deep. Then we talked about the opposite case, which is what happens when the mavui, the walls are less than 10 tefachim tall, and therefore the korah that you're putting on top of the walls from wall to wall is going to be less than 10 tefachim from the ground. So now you're digging out the ground in order to make the walls 10 tefachim and the korah off the ground 10 tefachim. So Yosef says you just have to dig into the mavui 4 tefachim. Another siren. And Abai says that you need to dig into the mavui 4 amos. And Yeah, another siren. These sirens, they really my brain just latches onto it and then can't do anything else. Adding a lechi to a mavui with a 4 amo protrusion. Right, exactly. So we said that if there is some wall jutting into the entrance of the mavui, so then, oh my gosh, drives me nuts. So then, if it's if it's less than 4 amos, it will just be considered a lechi. If it's more than 4 amos, well then you're going to need another lechi in order to allow you to carry in the mavui. Rav Papa said that you put this lechi opposite this protrusion, whereas Rav Huna Bar Rav Yeshua says you can even just oh my God, do you hear that? Rav Huna Bar Rav Yeshua says you can even just add it to this protrusion, and then but it just has to be smaller or taller, some way that you'll notice it. And then we talked about what happens when the protrusion is 8 amos. What happens when it's 4 amos wide, but the width of the mavui is 8 amos wide. So Rav Huna Bar Rav Yeshua says that is where you'll need a lechi. But if it's less than 8 amos, i.e. 7 amos, well then you're going to have more wall than you have breach, and then you would be allowed to carry in the mavui without a lechi or korah because it's completely enclosed by 4 walls. So it's just a regular Rishus HaYachid. Well, I don't know about that because it's like a public area, but once it has 4 walls, you wouldn't need a lechi or a korah. And Rav Ashi says even if it's exactly 8 amos, you still wouldn't need a lechi or a korah because it would be a suffix to Rabbanan Lahakal because you can't know that it's exactly 4 amos wide, so maybe it's a little more, in which case you'd have more wall than breach, and maybe it's still less, in which case it's just a lechi. And if it's exactly, well, who knows if it's exactly, and therefore maybe it's one of the other ones, and therefore suffix to Rabbanan Lahakal, and you can carry in there without a lechi or a korah. Friends, that was Daf Hey of Masechta Ayruvin. Hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.